Okay.
Okay, it's not 103,
No.
it's 10:04, so we're gonna call it to order.
All right.
Thanks, ma'am.
Thank y'all for being here today. We've got a few items on the agenda to go through today. Some of them are kind of wrap up from fiscal year 23. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's what we'll start with initially. If you looked at the financial summary for fiscal year 23, our actual expenses and revenues tracked really relatively close to what we had budgeted, so felt pretty good about where we end up from a budget standpoint. If there is one, if you look at the capital fund, Fund 4, that one maybe looks a little funny because we had 79% of revenue and 79% of expenditures. Really, that's a timing piece with some of the ESSER monies coming through on those HVAC projects and everything. So the fact that they matched up, that they're exactly the same percentage short, we feel good about that. But that is one that you look at and you go, well, hey, why is that one a little bit out of line? But that's really what that is. It's more about a timing piece without some of those bills are submitted and then the ESSER funding coming back on those. So expenses for the year were up $10.6 million from fiscal year 22. The majority of that, the vast majority of that is our HVAC projects that we were continuing with, and those were being for the most part funded through ESSER money. Our state revenues were up.
Hold on, Doc, can you talk a little bit about what's left with the AC, since AC's been such a hot topic?
Phase 4 is what's left. Phase 4 will finish up Central. That really is the majority of that.
For Central.
Yeah, Central. So I know some people ask questions about Bodie. There's not an additional project right now planned at Bodie. We have had some conversations with Schneider about some preliminary plans for that and everything, but right now there's not money budgeted to do that right now. That was not part of the original phase, and part of that was I think there was it was expressed there was not an interest in putting more money into Bodie at the time. But we do have some preliminary amounts that we would be able to figure out and do that. So we're aware of that, but that's on our radar, and we do have some rough estimates of how much that project would cost. But
on the $10.6 million that was in excess of last year, how much of that was the air conditioning?
I want to say that probably run the ESSER money, the HVAC project for about $9 million. Is that right, Katie? Mm-hmm. Yeah, about $9 million. Some of the other areas that we had been tracking all year long that we were up in expenses, some purchase services in special ed. That's an area that we've seen a lot of growth in, and part of that is that we're having to outsource a lot of our OT, speech pathology, things like that. We had some additional expenses in food costs this year. We had some additional expenses in utilities. It's pretty much the same song and dance every month when I would share that each month. But those were the areas that generally saw most of the expenses increase in. A little bit in fuel costs too.
Thanks.
But yeah, the definite majority of that, and also salaries. Salaries were up a little bit as well. State revenues were up $1.143 million from fiscal year 22. Tax revenues were up $3.4 million, so those were both positives. Operating fund balance at the end of the year, and again, this is a snapshot of a moment in time, but it's always a good place to kind of look at where our operating fund balance is. And our operating fund balance at the end of fiscal year 22 was $40.4 million. At the end of this fiscal year, it was just slightly over $50 million. So our fund balance did go up by about $9.5 million. Now, granted, that's a snapshot of a day to a day in time. Some invoices could come in a few days later and change that number. But as far as where we look at as of that date at the end of the year, that's where we were at.
That's good. That's good news.
That was good news.
And there's a required percentage that needs to be above
The
15?
fund balance percentage by board policy, we like to keep it above 20%.
Above
And I
20.
think we ended the year up about 34.6%.
And it's about there now?
Yeah,
That's what we show right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so we are right now in a good position,
okay.
which is great with fiscal year '24 coming up, so.
Yeah,
So yeah, that pretty much is it. If there are any other questions, now I'll talk a little bit about the healthcare trust as well.
go ahead.
All right, the healthcare trust ended the year at 3.586 million. A balance there. Grab my sheet here. A couple of things that we really honestly had a very good year with our healthcare trust. The plan for the year from July 22 to June 23 ended the year with a funding ratio of 84.4%, which is very healthy. We ended up with a surplus of just slightly over 2.4 million. The EPO, which we had been kind of concerned about watching, really kind of trended back a little bit for us towards the end of the year. Still ended up with a funding ratio of 104% and a deficit of 166,000. But not at the level that we had been seeing. The PPO and the HSA both, though, more than made up for that. The PPO was a funding ratio of 74% and a surplus of a little over 1.2 million. And the HSA was a funding ratio of 80% and a funding surplus of a little over 1.35 million, or 1.3 million. So we really ended up in a good position, a good year for our healthcare trust. At the end of fiscal year 23, like I said, 3.586 million. But then also have to remember that we do have about 2 million invested also in the healthcare trust. So really, there's another 2 million available from that amount of money. So good year all around from the healthcare trust standpoint. Be happy to answer any questions you might have about that. All right, moving on to the next piece, the Carden Park erosion project. Just wanted to give you an update there. Originally, we had put the RFP out, and originally the plan was to bring back a recommendation on the bids at this month's board meeting. When we opened the bids a couple of weeks ago, they were considerably higher than anticipated. And when I say considerably, more than double what we had anticipated. So we got together with Andy Macias. Andy sat down with us. We're going to go back to the drawing board a little bit, issue a new RFP with still some long-term solutions, but looking at more inexpensive ways to be able to do that. It's not a project that we feel like we can put off. The erosion is not suddenly going to get better over there.
Can you describe a little bit of like what's going on and what the RFP was for?
Really, to put it into simple layman terms as I can, water's running down the hill too fast and we need to slow it down. And
Down that, and that's like the west side?
kind of more toward the street there. If you drive by there to look, I mean, the dirt is eroding considerably around where there has been concrete and fill put in there. And so we really have to find ways to slow that water down before it gets there. There are a number of different ways, engineering-wise, that you can do that. What we had additionally planned, I think, had some baffles and some things like that, but was going to involve considerable cost from concrete. I think we're going to come back and look at some mats with larger amounts of fill at the bottom to try to cut down on that speed of that water coming down the
Do you
hill.
know the cost that you had anticipated, and was that budgeted?
It was budgeted. I don't like to throw that number out because sometimes that affects the bids.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, but yeah, so what we, and so.
So we have some money like allocated to fix it?
We do,
Okay.
yes. We had budgeted for this.
Okay.
Andy came back and he was really surprised that it had that came back that high. And there was a lot of variety in some of the bids. Some of them, their mobilization cost was really, really high, and some of the other pieces of it were really, really high. So there was not a lot of consistency even within the bids. So, but just to let you know, we're going back to drawing board. We'll put a new RFP out with some modifications. Not modifications, and then what I want to be clear about is that we're not going back to do modifications that will just be cheap. We're going back to do modifications that will be different, but will still be a long-term solution. I think there have been a lot of times in this district that we have gone and said, well, this is what we can afford, and we do it, and it's cheap, and then it's a problem again 5 years down the road. So we don't want this to be a problem 5 years down the road. We want to be able to come back with a permanent solution, or at least a long-term solution with this, but there's going to be modification to do that. So, any questions about that? All right. I get to talk about some good news here, actually. That's a nice thing to do. So if you have a copy of the quarterly investment report, we talked earlier in the year about, because of where interest is now, something that's not been really something we worried or thought much about in the past few years. Didn't matter, 0.15 was 0.15 pretty much everywhere, but we have, the way our funding comes in, we're front-loaded early in the calendar year. A lot of that money we will not need till later in the year. I always say it's like Dad gives you all of your allowance at Christmas for the year and says it has to last you. And so, so some of that money, rather than it sitting there and not working for us, we have put it to work for us a little bit. And so through July 31st, our total return, I guess you'd say, in dividend, interest, and coupons is about $284,000. So we are in a good position with that. The money that we have even in our liquid series right now, I think we have a little over $7 million in the liquid series right now. I looked yesterday, the 7-day effective rate on that right now is 5.366. So we're making some good money right now. At the end of July, the weighted average portfolio of our operating account was 4.634. And you may go, well, hey, why, if the liquid's paying 5.3, why are we at 4.64? Well, we have laddered some money out. And some of those longer term ones that we put initially actually paying lower than the short term ones right now. So we've done that to kind of help smooth the curve a little bit as rates change a little over time. But we may look to put some more in some shorter investments right now too, with rates being so high at this time. The healthcare trust, we also, like I had mentioned earlier, we put $2 million into that. We haven't seen as much return on that because we don't have a lot of money tied up in the liquid account. But we do have, if you look, there's a T-bill that's coming due early September there, and we'll see probably about $25,000 of return on that. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that, but feel like we're in a good place right now. The weighted average portfolio on that is 5.1% interest. So good numbers all around. Again, it's a good opportunity for us actually to put our money to work a little bit and generate a little bit of revenue for us. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Or take applause with the
Oh, no, I thank the Federal Reserve for raising interest rates, so.
Don't get rid of that.
I don't think anybody's gonna get applause for the Federal Reserve, so.
No.
That would be a real stretch, so, but yes, it's a good thing right now, for us to be able, like I said, to generate some revenue, so. Next thing we'll look at the board agenda. There are a few things on the board agenda Monday night, that I wanna mention. Probably one of the big ones is the tax rate hearing is Monday night. Prior to us approving the tax rate, there is one thing that we are going to do, and we're going to ask the board to approve some prepayment of some bonds. And there's two reasons for this. One of those is because by doing that prepayment, it's going to allow us to keep our debt service levy at 53 cents. If we did not do that, we would need to roll our debt service levy back to about 17 cents. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to keep that where it is. Where did I set that? Yeah, that's all right. I know it off the top of my head. Here it is. And so the other piece of that is that's going to save us about $819,000 in interest as well. So it kind of has a double-fold benefit to us. But the big one, like I say, is that not that $819,000 in interest savings anything to sneeze at, but the big piece is we need to be able to keep that debt service levy at that amount. So then, prior to approving the tax rate, we're going to ask the board to do that because that will impact how we do our tax rate. The tax rate for 23-24 that we're going to ask the board to approve actually is going down by 2 cents due to the way some money comes in with assessed valuations, things like that. The assessed valuation numbers, just to be completely blunt, were kind of disappointing. For those who don't know, the way assessment works for schools, reassessment occurs every 2 years on assessed valuation. So if that amount doesn't change this year on reassessment, it's not going to change this next year. So the assessed value went up 0.78%, which was, like I say, disappointing. As I talked to a lot of superintendents around the state, especially south of 36 Highway, 3%, 4%, 7%, 10, 12%. North of 36 Highway, not so much. Okay. So again, that number was disappointing, especially when a week later, after we got our assessed valuation numbers, there was a story in the paper about real estate prices being up 4.1% from last July. So that is what it is. Part of that is personal property. The explanation got is that personal property car prices came back a little bit on used car values. So that a little bit is the offset. One of the other pieces, just a note too, this year new revenue from new construction improvements is $113,000. Last year that was a little bit over 1.3 million. I think, I don't know this for sure, I think that probably was the wire rope expansion was impacting that significantly. So didn't have.
I want to call that the Hilliard expansion.
Or Hilliard, yes, I'm sorry. The Hilliard expansion at the wire rope site, yes. Sorry, thank you. Thank you, yes, the Hilliard expansion. So that's kind of where that is with the tax rate. So we'll be asking the board to approve that tax rate on Monday night.
Okay, so I think what we had decided to do was that if we were going to move it to the board to hurry up the process, we would send it as a finance committee recommendation with a vote.
Yes.
Yep. Did you have a question?
Sure.
Before I.
Quick question, on those bonds that you're paying off early, what rate
Marcus?
are we paying on those?
You know, I don't know for sure off the top of my head there.
What rate, is that what you asked?
Yeah,
What wouldn't get it?
Yeah,
that's fine.
I'll find out for sure. I'll email you. But I just don't know that for sure. I'm not gonna lie, we let LJ Hart do a lot of that stuff because that's the world they live in.
Sure.
They explained it to me and lots of times I go,
Since Dennis asked a question, I will too. How does paying those off increase our need for the debt service? I don't, because we want to keep the debt levy higher.
right.
You want to keep the debt service levy higher, so if you ever do have a tax initiative that you want to run, or some kind of bond issue, I guess, then you have a maximum, you have a bigger
Right.
capacity.
I'm for that, but how does paying that off keep it higher?
Well, you have to pay it off if you're not going to run a bond issue, then you have to pay off early unless it'll drive it down.
Okay.
It's basically a cash needs.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So-
absolutely.
So if you were gonna pay them over time, your cash needs would be less, which would lower your levy, so you
Yep.
gotta keep the levy high, so you're paying them off in
Yep.
advance.
Okay, thank you.
So let's say the debt goes through 2034, we'll just use that as an example, then now the debt will only go through 2032. So it actually is gonna benefit you at the end of the day, in the long run, for sure.
Thanks.
Never hurts to pay anything off.
Right,
That's for
right.
sure.
So Dr. Seegers, you're wanting to recommend to the board on Monday what specifically?
Well,
To
that,
keep the levy the same and.
the recommendation will be to set the levy at
Yeah.
43207.
And you should do that during the tax rate hearing.
Yeah. It's ahead of time.
You just can't vote on it in the tax rate hearing?
No.
That's just
Hearing,
the
but
public.
you can make a
Yeah.
recommendation.
He'll provide your recommendation,
Yeah.
and then we'll vote down on,
70.
And then you'll vote on 7B, yeah.
Okay, so, to be able to make that a finance committee recommendation, all those in favor say aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions, approved. Okay, what's next? SRO?
Next thing that would be on there is the RFP for the window safety film. Just want to point that out to you. RFP is going out to put some safety film around identified entrances, next phase of some of our safety and security. Mr. Nolte, congrats to him, did a lot of work last year, and we were able to receive part of the $20 million in safety grants that the state put out. I'll brag on it. We got $600,000, which was the largest in the whole state. We're number one. I'd like to be able to say that when we can. There's another round of $50 million coming out at this time, but we have kind of gotten the indication likelihood of us getting any in the second round. If you got it in the first round, it's pretty small. So, but we are going to utilize this is something we've discussed for a while. Great opportunity for us to do that. So that RFP will be going out.
We'll still apply though.
We'll still apply, yeah, absolutely.
Some people are too lazy to apply, so you might get.
Does,
Never know.
You never know.
does
Never
the,
know.
is the tinting just so people can't see, or does it have any other?
It,
glass?
It's a ballistic, it's kind of ballistic film
That's
for
what I was gonna
protection.
yeah.
Okay.
It's got the UV, which would do some heating and reduction as well. They talk about that, but it's more of a ballistic film
Stuff coming through the window.
for
Yeah.
blast and things coming through, yes. Hold that together.
Good call.
More so than the industry standard, because right now, a lot of your industry standards, like our graphics companies will put up those, like we have graphics all over, a lot of our buildings have done that. That's a very minimal level. We're probably looking at least 3 times that thickness of protection in areas we need to make sure are protected.
Very good.
All right, any other questions about the RFP for the window safety film? Next item that will be on the board agenda Monday night, discuss a little bit, the SRO agreement. Normally, personnel, MOUs are not necessarily things that come to this committee, but because of the amount, we did mention this, and then we've had a lot of discussion about this. Mr. Nolte and Mr. Carter and Chief Luster have all had a lot of conversations. There's been back and forth as we've kind of fine-tuned this contract. It needed some cleaning up, needed some updating, and some things like that. So we finally have gotten to a point that we'll be ready to bring that forward. One of the things that I think has gotten a lot of public discussion is there was some mention in one of the iterations of the contract going back and forth about funding for vehicles for the police. We've always had a piece in there that talked about funding for equipment. That's not new in the contract. We've always had that in there. But the city is really, in all honesty, has not utilized that from us very often. And so we are being a little more intentional about that. And I think there's some intent, and Chief's here today, and Mr. Carter's here today too, can maybe answer some questions if people have that. But some intent, I don't know if you've seen any of the cars that the SROs have, but I would put my old 98 CRV up against them because they have lived their usefulness. That would be a good way to describe that. So I know there was some discussion about that and everything, but that's what that piece is that we'll be putting set out for them to purchase equipment. If they choose to use that towards vehicles, whatever equipment they might need, that's where that'll come from. So, Chief, you might want to speak to that a little bit too. Sure.
And so in the contract, it's a line item for $50,000 in supplies, right?
Equipment and training.
Up to.
Up to,
Yeah.
yeah, up to.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, specifically, you kind of hit on it, specifically to the car, if that's the direction we would go, which, as you mentioned, right now, the SROs are driving the oldest cars in the fleet just by nature of, as a police department, us managing our fleet. But when we talk about this partnership between the school district and the police department for the SRO program, I think both sides see the value in that partnership. And that vehicle is an important piece of that. One, just for the visibility that that vehicle has in front of the schools or at the schools. More importantly to me as the police chief, it gives those officers the ability to respond to other schools in the district quickly if there is an emergency. So that's a benefit there as well. So as I'm trying to really, I was tasked almost immediately when I took this job or received this job of kind of looking at a more holistically at the entire police department's fleet, and this piece kind of fits into that. However, I also think that because this partnership has been so successful over the years that, we should celebrate that some. So if moving forward, the SRO vehicles, I plan to put maybe a little bit fancier graphics package on there and indicate that that's a school resource officer to kind of advertise that partnership within the community and to let them know that our officers are out there in school. So I think it's just like the entire, having the officers in school, just like the entire partnership benefits everybody. I think this is an important piece to it as well. It's not just, I heard some pushback that we were just trying to get a car, and it's a lot more to that. It's not just us trying to get a car from the school district. I think it's a lot more important piece to the overall program.
And so in the summer, the SROs that we have they work for you all, they work the street.
Sometimes. So they still, during the summer, they go to their training. So there's an annual SRO conference every year at a national level. There's also one at the state level that we send them to. That's where they get their continuing education hours. That's where, we talk about, evolving national best practices within SROs. That program, as a lot of people here has really evolved over the years. So they do their training. We also spend some time on youth programming as well. So they have the Kid Police Youth Camp, and they also have the Youth Academy. So that's another couple weeks. If they're not doing that, yes, we will assign them to the patrol duties throughout the summer as needed for our personnel needs.
And one thing that we did start this year and I think we'd like to continue is there's one available for our summer school in our elementary middles. I mean, there's just one, but because usually it's not as, so they'll work with us on the scheduling on that to try to provide one during that month of June to support our summer schools as well.
Can you, so you're new on the scene, can you talk a little bit about why it would not be ideal to have volunteer veterans or other alternatives to an SRO, because that was a big question.
I think, it's important I'm a big proponent of the SRO program. I had some previous experience in leading the SRO or just youth programming in general. I think there's so much more than, a lot of times there's a perception of we just need a person with some training and that's armed in a school for safety purposes, and that's important. Like, the enhancement of safety is important, but I think maybe just equally important is those mentorships, those relationships that those officers are building within, with the youth in our community. I think that's just as important part of the program. I think, I don't know if I was talking to you or not, Winnie, but I gave an example of, in my previous job where I talked to kids that didn't make a bad decision because of the mentorship with the youth. So I had an officer come to me and said, my friends went out and stole a car last night, and I didn't go with them because I didn't want to disappoint officer so-and-so, who was their SRO, or who was their leader at the PAL Center, at the Police Athletic League. So I think that's really important to have that police presence. Not only, the primary driver there is safety. We want our schools to be safe, but there's so much more to it when we start talking about those relationships that we can't put on a stat sheet. There's no stat that I can put that this kid didn't go steal a car and his friends did, but we know that exists. And that's why I think, I support the program, and that's why I think it's important that those are actual police officers in the school performing that task.
And I would add to that too, I think access to resources. I mean, if they're linked to the police department and there's resources at the police department, they can access that. As somebody that's in Missouri called a school protection officer, that would be a commissioned officer. That's a route to take if you want to go that way, but there's resources that we would rely on with the police department that they can rely on, that those others cannot. And then we'd end up maybe calling them anyway, because they have a limit to where they can only go to this point. Well, then we have to call the police department and those people to come help. So we might as well have them there, and it's, boom, it's seamless and done.
And this contract is different from the last contract also in that there's a prorated portion that wasn't in there before. Did I read that correctly?
You talking about the salaries and benefits?
Yeah, that if you don't have it filled for a certain period of time, that
Yes.
we don't.
Yes.
And that was not in there previously.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
Nice addition. Any other questions, comments, concerns, discussion?
It still wouldn't be unusual that you would shuttle an existing car into that role and do the replacement into the department, would it be, or is that what would still happen?
No, if we're going to, utilize district money to purchase a car, that car would be designated to the school resource officer. So quite honestly, I need to get their car, they're the worst cars I have right now. I need to get those traded out. And so, that would be my intention that would be an SRO vehicle.
You didn't want to do a ride around with Officer Davis, so I promise. That car was hot.
Yeah, he's got the best one, so.
Any other questions, comments? So this is gonna go to the board. It's been talked about for some time. So if we'd like to get it approved, I would entertain a motion to approve it.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions. Approved. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Chief. Thanks, Brian.
What else, Dr. Segrist?
One last thing, and this is really just kind of more of an informational piece. Rally House approached us about doing some trademark licensing with our schools. Generally, when people have sold items with our school logos in the community,
They don't ask.
they just do it. And so it's not been a thing we've really picked on about, but Rally House actually approached us and said, hey, we would like to actually enter into a licensing agreement with you, and then you will receive some residual amount from the sales of items that have school district logos on it. So one of the things on there is a trademark licensing agreement with Rally House. I don't know if this will amount to a lot of money for us. If it amounts to $1, it's $1 more than we've gotten in the past on any kind of a licensing agreement. So I appreciate Rally House reaching out to us and saying, hey, we want to do the right thing here. If we're going to sell your branded logos in our store, we would like to give you some residual income from that. So just a kind of an informational piece on that, that's going to be on there for approval too.
Quick question on that. In a prior life, I served on the booster board, or booster chair for Central. How do you think that, I know a lot of revenue was derived for Booster Club from selling that gear, et cetera, and the impact, discussions with the other schools, et cetera. I assume they're looking at each and every school. They want.
Doing the 3 high schools right now, I
Sure.
think is the initial, yeah. I don't think it'll impact what goes on at the building level with shirt sales, with things like that. Part of the reason, I'll just be real honest, stuff around the house is not cheap.
Sure.
And so there is a price point probably that impacts a little bit. I think probably more where, you would see shirts with school logos, you see them at Walgreens, at CVS, you see them at Ace, True Value and Hardware, Westlake, at Walmart. And so those shirts are already out there. We've never received anything back from them. I don't know that they have hurt the sales with our
Good point.
boosters. So this will just be an option that they'll be there. If somebody happens to go into Rally House, is looking for something, goes, oh, hey, yeah, there's a there's a Lafayette shirt I can buy, or a Benton shirt, or a Central shirt I can buy, maybe something that comes back to us with this.
I'm all for the community pride.
Yeah.
And people wearing the gear, so that's great.
Yeah.
Are the local printing operations, like companies, are they still able to print
Yeah,
school
we're-
merchandise or
we-
like?
We are
is there
not
any-
going to the level of
Hunting them down. and
putting a
stuff.
copyright on our
Okay,
stuff.
good.
That's an expensive
Okay, good.
process, and it's, and in all honesty, our logos are pretty generic. It's a cardinal,
'Cause-
a shamrock, an Indian head, those are kind of hard.
Because my after-school kids have a Cricut, so
Yeah.
I didn't want to shut their enterprise down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, those, I think you'll still see those local companies will still have those things. So we're not like the chiefs telling them, hey, you can't use our logo. We're not at that level, definitely.
You just
but-
change the colors and it works, apparently.
Yeah, just put a K and a C and a heart and it works, and a helmet, so.
Okay, and you want this approved at the board? I missed the
board.
window safety film, but it's okay.
Yeah, this will be an agreement that the board will have.
Is it on, are we voting on it? Yes, it's not, okay. I need a motion and a second. We're gonna vote. This is how we're doing it now. Tom, this is what we're doing.
I'll do it.
Okay. There's a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Abstentions? Approved. So I had one question. So oftentimes through the agenda at the board meetings, there's items that are pretty significant sized contracts. So like, for example, one of them is the 3D Enwritable, is that what it was? What's it called?
3D and writable.
Yeah, it's like $67,000. I always get kind of leery when we approve those at the board and we didn't talk about them at finance, so my question is usually like, is this budgeted? Do we have the money for this?
If it's on there, it's budgeted.
Okay.
And so a lot of that stuff comes through academic services or those
Okay.
sides. I'm not involved in those conversations, other than setting the budget and beginning of the year.
Okay,
So
but if
this
they
is
come
something they
to
would have
us,
budgeted.
so, okay, that's
Yeah.
what I need to know, because
Yeah.
I'm always like, I don't know, that's a lot.
And that's a good question, since a lot of the general population aren't going to know things like that. so.
Right, and it would be very similar to like the Daikin Preventative Maintenance Service Agreement. It was a little higher last year, I mean, that's $141,000, but it was 150 some last year. So it's, yeah, we're never gonna run something through there.
Yeah, I figured that was the case, but I'm like, that's a lot of money, I don't know. what we're doing.
Yeah, those things are all budgeted, so
Okay.
they would not come up without being budgeted.
Perfect. Anything else?
Any open items that anybody would like to talk about?
But yeah, I like the fact that we're taking some of those notes. I certainly don't count that as binding to the council, no way, but or to the board, but I think that it validates that somebody's looked at that, looked at it with Robert, and made some recommendation. And if I was a board member, I would appreciate that. So I think that's a good thing we're doing. Appreciate
Well,
it.
there's an election coming up, so you can be if you want to try. So, wink, wink.
Plus, I'm always happy to be able to say, well, Tom recommended it.
Tom said it was
so-
fine. So that kind of brings me to, one of the things that we don't do at this group that I think could be beneficial, like the purchasing card, the bills, the donations, that's a lot. I mean, we had 2 purchasing card reports. One was 85 pages, one was 45 pages. And I'm gonna say, I don't know that everyone goes through those. But if we brought them to the finance committee meeting first, then there would be at least some, I know Tom's gonna go through them for sure. So I don't know if we would want to do that or not. It's long, it's a lot.
I'm glad that it's helping anyway, so I'm commenting in general. But the thing that I think is, if we're gonna have us participate even more effectively, sometimes we need to have this stuff sent to us before this meeting. Even the year-end budget, we're all scrambling around to say, and I don't think we typically don't get much documentation before the meeting. So if there are things that folks want us to look at, we need to have that ahead of the meeting.
And we talk a lot about that when we talked about redoing the committees, is that the staff are kind of like, I'm just shooting in the dark here, I don't know what you want and what you don't want. And then we create the agenda and then we're like, well, I didn't see this, I didn't know. So I think what I'll push my co-chair, Kenneth, to do is to actually meet with Dr. Segrist beforehand. Because you sent me the email this week and I was like, yep, looks good. But I hadn't looked at the board agenda as well and said, oh, there's probably some other stuff we could shove over here.
Part of that is the tight timeline, I'll be
Yeah.
honest with you. Because, you know, we just went on board agenda Tuesday,
Yeah.
and this meeting's on Thursday, so,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and we can, I mean, I think if we can figure out I think Kenneth and I can get with Dr. Segrist and talk more about, like, just from an example of this agenda, like, what are the types of things that we can pull over? Like, obviously, if some of these things are already budgeted and they're coming from academic services, like, we don't need to do that, it's already been budgeted.
Right.
But, you
So
know.
lots of times when I've sent the agenda to you for this committee meeting, I don't know everything that's on the board agenda yet.
Yeah,
Right.
And so,
yeah,
that's why we've gone back to putting the board agenda just as a standing item on this, so that we can go over anything that's on it. Because that was a concern that was brought last year was, well, there are things on the board agenda that we didn't talk about in finance. And
Yeah.
like I say, if they come from other departments, I may not even know that they're on there.
yeah, and usually when, you know, just from my professional life, when we do a board meeting agenda at CAP or at the State Association Board, we'll just take that agenda and then just say, okay, what needs to be on academics, what needs to be on finance, and just start pulling it off the, you know. So you're gonna have some regular things that are on the finance committee, and then you're gonna go through your regular agenda and just knock it out.
I'd be happy to get direction on what you all want.
Yes, let's meet
on the
more,
agenda.
more meetings with me, Dr. Segrist.
I can't wait.
Shannon.
And he laughed very
He laughed
loudly.
really loud.
I just wanna see, I wanna make sure you bring confetti.
I have some in my purse.
Glad you mentioned it. She carries a bag
Sure, I have
around.
some in my office.
No, I was late today. Oh, I got all of you guys, that's so good, okay. All right, don't tell Tom what we're talking about, I'll get him later. Okay, anything else?
Sanction day, Tom, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's all right.
It's not breaking and entering if you don't lock your door, it's just entering. Okay, if not, 10:46, adjourn.
All right, thank you all for being here.